Cool. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I'm Mikaila, and I'm actually a designer for an ed tech startup in Boston. And at this point, right now, I have a weird experience in that I think I've read more code than I've written, just because I work at such a small company that so many hats get worn. And so I wanted to talk about my experience of being really new to coding and how I kind of figured out a way to make it a little bit easier to read other people's code. So right now, since you're working on your apps from scratch, most of your code probably looks like this here if you're early on in the course. And so everything's in its own place and it's really proper and clean, and that's awesome. But eventually you're going to hopefully get a job, and that probably involves working with other people on a project that's been around for a little while, or code that's been around for a little while. And so you're going to have to read code that you didn't write, and you'll be expected to work with other people. And so getting into that code might look a little bit more just like this to you. And so this is pretty common, especially in a small company, like a startup. And so for me, one day my boss asked me to start working on some of the front end code, and I was used to looking at this, mock-ups, and I had to move into this, which is our tables and navigating a bunch of code that a lot of people had touched. That's pretty large, so it was a little overwhelming for me. So I leveraged what I did know to kind of help me discover the things that I didn't know. And I sort of have diluted it into 3 steps. And so the first was I built a workflow map, which helped me kind of figure out how the code worked at a high level. So I tried to understand really well how the product worked, how the features each kind of fit in and where they fit in. And then next I selected a component of the workflow. So user sign-on, or we have a grading interface. And then when I started getting ready to actually make changes, I used the search functionality, which is in Sublime, Control-Shift-F, which searches through all of the files in there to locate a specific snippet. So in this case, this is part of our interface, and we have the ability to type in a comment. And when I was looking for that component, I basically found out that it's in a partial and buried really deep inside of our code. Excuse me. And so I don't think I would have found it had I not just simply searched for it. And then I basically just edited things continually until I broke them or fixed them or whatever, and made it work for myself. So I kind of suggest that people use a similar workflow if they can make it work for them. And so there's a couple of ways there's a ton of ways to start getting involved in other people's code, but I put together a few that are easy and I think accessible to begin with. So one is just to start pair programming. So find a friend who programs and ask them if they'll work on a side project with you. One person drives, which is actually coding, while the other person navigates, which is dictating each of the lines. Another option is to go to a hackathon, which is usually a weekend long or a one-day event. And the topics can get really specific. So a couple of my friends went to a baseball Boston hackathon in the spring, and all of the projects that got done that day were all about baseball. And it's kind of similar to a meetup, which is another great place that you can start meeting people who have similar interests as you. So civic tech, ed tech, Polymer, Node, anything, different languages or different kind of fields. There's a lot of those out there. And the best part about this is that you're learning and you're increasing your communication skills, but you're also expanding your network. So you have the potential to find someone who might actually get you a job. So another really good thing that you can do without necessarily even like leaving your house is to start working on open source projects. So open source projects are a great way to dive into other people's code, especially people who have a lot more experience than you. And so because it can be a little overwhelming, the best piece of advice I've heard around this is think of it as a learning experience and choose like a learning goal. So for example, if you're interested in a specific company, then check out their open source projects and see if you can work on a certain like feature of theirs, like user sign-on or maybe machine learning. Or if you're looking to dig into a specific framework or a language, then you can go ahead and look at even like trending repositories on GitHub for open source projects. And even that framework that Mayo talked about earlier, by Zerb, is open source as well. So you could use that as an opportunity to not only learn framework, but actually contribute to it, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of great open source projects out there. So on top of this, the most important part is that you just pick something that you're really passionate about because you'll be fully invested in it, and then that'll show through in the work that you do. And also it'll be online, and future employers can see that. So on the other side of this is that now that you're part of a community, as somebody who is expecting to be able to pull good code from other people and read good code from other people, you should try and kind of produce the same thing. So follow best practices and make sure to read the docs. And then as well, you should make sure you put notes or comments into your code. And it's actually extremely helpful, not just for other people, like if they're trying to decipher why you built something a certain way, if you're working on a public API, or check like using code that other people are going to check out. But it's also really helpful for you, like if you go back and look at your code within a few months or even a few weeks. So like I went back and looked at my Splurdy app, which is only a couple weeks old now, and there's already parts of it that I'm like, why did I do this? And so I should have made comments to myself and made sure that like I could read it. And if you get into the good, like into kind of habits of best practices, when you start working on larger teams, they'll just like start flowing naturally out of you because it'll be the typical way that you code. So in conclusion, reading other people's code can be a challenge, but and it's a really good way to find out how little you know, but it's also the best way to kind of bridge that gap quickly. So get excited, start working on other people's code, and start jumping in today, because it's a great way to lead to new friends, new skills, and could actually get you a whole new job. So.
Cool stuff. Really good talk. Does anybody have any questions for Mikaila? So not so much of a question, but a comment on open source. So what I've found is that a lot of projects, I saw that you had Netflix on there, a lot of those big projects are hard to jump in for newcomers. Mm-hmm. I've been actually trying to source out like new projects so you can easily jump in. Do you have any tips for that? And then like a shameless plug for the community open source.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did that. I kind of like breezed over the shameless Firehose plug. So Colin's been doing a lot of work around it, so I wanted to give him a shout out. And what's awesome is that like I don't think is Firehose not actually open source, but it's open to the community. So is like my understanding. So
it's technically open source because we don't have private repos.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should at this point broadcast out.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I do plan on, I got to flesh it out and talk to everybody about it. But I think there's some great opportunity to build out stuff for more advanced applications for everybody to start on.
Yeah.
So.
So I actually asked my mentor for like open source projects that he's worked on, and he gave me a couple, one that he started and then one that he had joined. And he was like, you could check both of these out. And I think because they're smaller and they're more localized, like you have a better chance if you're new of like getting your stuff accepted. And so generally, like that's another thing with open source projects is that you always have to do like a pull request, or like when you're not just able to like merge your stuff into their branch, somebody has to approve it. And so one way to kind of be able to get your foot in the door is to work on smaller projects. So I would say like don't go to the GitHub repo and just like pick the top one, because you probably won't be able to contribute right away. But I think also like another good thing about going to meetups and going to like hackathons is that you'll meet people, like tons of people are working on small open source side projects. And I'm sure like once they meet you in person, they're more than happy to like help you, like allow you to contribute to the work that they're doing, which is really good because it's also a good way to like stay in touch with those people as well.
Yeah, one thing I might add is stuff like typos and like documentation that's out of date. That's like pretty low hanging fruit that probably like is pretty easily doable. So like those types of problems tend to be kind of an interesting thing to do too. And if you can do that on a bigger type project, you kind of get more credit than you deserve, which is kind of cool. So a buddy of mine is like trying to find like the low hanging fruit in some specific thing just because he wants to get his name on that repo. So it's just it's a tactic that you can take as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also, so I met a company, I know a company that is out of Boston right now, but there's like different ways to contribute, like Ken's saying, to an open source project. So it's an ed tech company and they're called Quill, and they do like they're a proofreading app basically for high school students. And so like when you go to their website, they have a paragraph they tell you like how many errors in it, and then students have to go through and try and find the errors. It could be spelling or grammar or whatever. And so they actually are open source in like every way. So even teachers can contribute by contributing content. So like if you write like a worksheet for them, then they count you as a contributor. And so if you get a little creative about like what kind of projects you're contributing to, then you're also probably going to be able to get accepted. It doesn't have to be like, I learned machine learning. Now I know that. So
I think that's why you say about contributing to like content. I think that was a great way for like our community site is you don't necessarily have to contribute to the code. You can contribute as a content creator. And I think that's also a really great way to put your name out there. Mm-hmm. And it's a sneaky way of actually contributing to code because Jekyll is not like others. You have to actually learn certain stuff in it to actually contribute. So you kind of killing two birds with one stone. So I've been looking for like stuff like that as well, where you can do content creation as well as code contributions.
Yeah. Yeah, you should check them out because they're a smaller company, and so they could like use the help, but they're like a non-profit, and that's why they're open source, because they're like, oh, we're not the only people who are working on this. So it's pretty cool.
Cool, good stuff. Any other questions?
There's this other open source thing called lol commits. I once heard about it. Don't want to talk about it too much.
What is it?
The maintainer is kind of a goofball, though. I probably guess talking to him. Cool, good stuff. Awesome talk, Mikaila. It was really fascinating to sort of think about sort of starting out by like you took it sort of the reverse way that I think a lot of people have, because most people learn how to code and then they work on a team. Like working on a team in code and sort of having to build up like the troubleshooting and the all that stuff before you have the foundation. It seems like a monumental task. So really impressive that you even would be willing to approach a problem like that. And I think that's really inspiring to all of us.
Cool, thanks. Yeah. If anybody wants to learn about what it's like to work on code that's been touched by like 20 people, let me know. within like a couple months.